Good morning, Stephen.
How are you?
Fantastic. I'm one of those people that I've always been fascinated to World War II, and the reason being is because my father fought in it, and I want
Oh,
to
really?
learn more and more and more about this war that people are starting to forget about.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, there was a time when it was all about World War II, but I think a lot of people have moved on. So it's good to sort of have this opportunity.
For you to do what you're doing with Good Assassins, season number 2 is about the greatest spy of World War II, Virginia Hall. Why haven't we heard about this before?
That's a great question because, as you said, she played a huge role in World War II, especially leading up to D-Day. And she faced a lot of challenges. The French resistance at that time, her main area of work was in France, um, all led by men. All the networks were led by men, and she was an American. She was disabled, and she was female. So she had three strikes against her just as soon as she got there. And what's so impressive about her is that not only did she serve as a spy, she actually pulled together this extensive network of dozens and dozens of men and women to fight the Nazis. And she was just so damn good at it.
Mhm.
She helped bring in all these weapons that were used before D-Day. She broke loose aviators from prison where they were being held by the Nazis and smuggled them back to Britain. She organized ambushes of Nazis on the roads and really became the number one target for the Nazis as far as spies go. They called her the Limping Lady, and they really brought in uh, numerous spies, telling them, "Find this woman. We want her off the grid, and basically we want to kill her."
Yeah.
So she not only faced resistance from her own side, from the French. She faced this intense hunt from the Nazis, which was very hard to escape.
Killed or tortured, what did the Germans really want most? Because I mean, both of it's two completely different things.
Well, when it comes to espionage, they definitely went with torture because they wanted her to reveal the names of her
Mm.
entire network. Um, and that's really one area where she excelled. I've said before that she had this great spidey sense of who she could trust and who she couldn't trust. And that was the downfall of many spies, male and female, in France. They trusted the wrong people, because the Nazis were very good at turning people and creating double agents.
Hmm.
So that's something that Virginia Hall dealt with all the time. People who came to her and said, I want to join the resistance, I want to fight for the Allies, and all she really had to base her trust on was her own impressions of that person. So she was very good at separating sort of the good from the bad and leading her network that way.
With the research that you put into Good Assassins, the greatest spy of World War II, when do you look at today's situation in Ukraine and Russia and go, "Oh my God, there's a story in there, and I'm going to find the next Virginia Hall"?
I have. I follow a lot of Americans who volunteer to go to Ukraine on Twitter. A lot of them tell their stories there. It's really a fascinating story of people who gave up their jobs, left their families, went to fight for freedom. And that's very much the story of Virginia Hall. I mean, she had a comfortable existence as a journalist in America. She didn't have to go to Europe and endanger herself the way she did. So I do think there is a common theme of, Americans seeing peril in the world and tyranny and going to fight it. It's really an honorable story.
Did Virginia have skills, or was it a calling? No matter what, she was going to answer that call.
I don't think she knew she had the skills until she got there.
Yeah.
She went. She always wanted to be a diplomat. She wanted to, go to, who knows, Paris or Buenos Aires as a consul or diplomat for the United States. But at the time, the State Department had a rule that no disabled people could serve as diplomats. So right from the get-go, she was kind of discriminated against because of who she was. So she really never had a chance in America to sort of fully show her skills. But when she got to France, she needed all of her abilities really just to survive,
Mhm.
let alone to excel. So, yeah, she found that she was a good leader of men, that she was a great organizer. She had all these drops coming in from airplanes in farmers' fields, and she never missed one. So she earned the respect of the French men pretty quickly. and from there just developed this really effective network against the Nazis.
He- Was she a visionary? Because, I mean, you talk about D-Day and stuff like that, and with all the connections that she had to have been able to see before it actually happened.
Yeah, I think she did have this gift to see the larger picture. Because she was not just a ground level spy passing messages or, talking to Nazi officers. She sort of had to see the full strategic plan of what was happening. So she went to France twice, first for the British and second for the Americans. And during that second trip, I think she started to see what was needed for D-Day to happen,
Mm-hmm.
and then she went to work. So again, we think of D-Day, we think of Omaha Beach, but there was a lot of prep work that went before that to make sure that those guys got off the beach and into the country. And she played a huge part. She brought in a lot of weapons. She turned a lot of ordinary Frenchmen into good guerrilla fighters and spies, and that really laid the groundwork for D-Day.
There's such a subliminal message here in the way that you said she's leading the men. We're talking about the World War II era, a woman leading men in that time period. What a beautiful story for today's women.
I agree. And she was given a chance. I mean, that's all she really asked for. She was not a self-promoter. She didn't sort of like want to become a star. She just wanted to serve the cause. And I think initially the French discounted her. They didn't really love Americans at that point. They didn't want a woman to lead them, but she was just so impressive in those first few months that no one could really doubt her. So she found a lot of allies within the French resistance, and I think over there she's probably more of a hero than she is here. She's well known. She's honored because of what she risked and what she accomplished.
Well, she got into the UK spy agency, guy. I mean, that right there says, hey, I've got something here that I can let you use as a tool.
Absolutely, and she even had to impress the British because most of the women they sent over, were fairly low-level spies. They were used to kind of entice Nazi officers into giving information or to deliver messages. We know of Josephine Baker, the famous jazz singer.
Mm-hmm.
She passed messages, but Virginia Hall was on a whole different level. She was going over there to really lead a network, and that's a whole different ballgame. You have to be very good with people. You have to be a great organizer, and as you said, you have to have a vision of where all these tactics are leading. What is the bigger picture? And she had that gift.
One of the greatest things about your podcast, Good Assassins, the second season, is the fact that you tell the story like everything leads to the next. In other words, it's like when Virginia saved a British pilot. I mean, it's one of those things where she's going to need that skill on something else she's going to be doing in the future. It's almost like she was always the student, and then she activated it.
Yeah, I agree with that. There is a great scene where she's with this escaped pilot who's being hunted by the Nazis. They're in a cafe, and she has to read the room and she has to read the other person. So she had this emotional intelligence where she could tell not only if you were, a double agent or a fake, she could almost tell what you were going to do just by how nervous you were you trustworthy? And she had to sort of, honestly, a lot of times she had to calm down the men. They were the ones getting hysterical, and they were the ones who were, prone to rash movements. And she was very steady. And so she, at one point, broke 12 British aviators out of a prison, smuggled them back to London. And in France in 1942, that is a feat that is almost unmatched because very few large groups of aviators got out like that, and she was able to engineer that.
Did she ever face fear and doubt, or was that just something that I'm not gonna if I don't deal with it, I don't have to live with it?
She did. Her friends talk about even her depression. Things weren't going very well for her. Her agents were being betrayed. I mean, the Nazis were very good at running double agents, so they rolled up networks and tortured people and got them to name names. So yeah, she lived in a climate of fear, but I think the thing that impresses me is that her men never knew that. They always saw her as very strong, fearless. I tell the story in the podcast how her first time over there had to escape across the Pyrenees, the mountain range. and there were men who barely made it. And she had a wooden leg. She's a woman dressed very lightly, not dressed for the snow and ice up there. But she led by example. She didn't complain, and she got them across. And they just looked at her really as almost as a superhuman figure by the end.
One of the things in listening to the podcast that I got, it's one of those where, the child inside of me going, Virginia sitting down with Tom Cruise after watching Top Gun and her looking at him going, dude, that's nothing.
That's a great point. Actually, I love Top Gun Maverick, so I'm not going to diss Tom, but yeah, she did things. She did things with so little support. I mean, she was dropped in there. She had a cover story, and that's about it. She had to sort of make up things as she went along. So, um, yeah, the Tom Cruises of the world, the Mavericks of the world, have the entire military complex behind them. Virginia
Yeah.
Hall really just had her own wits. So, yeah, very impressive. And I just think it comes back to her intelligence. Really, she kind of looked around the corner and saw what was coming. She knew how the Nazis were going to try to capture her or take apart her network, and so she was very proactive in preventing that.
How did receive word that Robert Alesh was on her tail?
Well, she had met him early on. He was Robert Alesh is a fascinating guy. He's a priest who
Yeah.
came across as this very pro-French resistance warrior. And because he was a priest, he was, he got that instant respect in France, which was very Catholic at the time. But he was a double agent. He's working for the Nazis, and he used the the costume of a priest really to do these evil things. So Robert Alesh not only, revealed spies, but he would also entice French people into the resistance and then betray them. So
Mm.
he's a really dark character. So she initially met him and had sort of mixed emotions. She thought there was something that he wasn't telling her. Again, that spidey sense that she had of who was trustworthy or not. So really, that first meeting is when she had that instinct. This guy is not all he says he is. So he became, this became sort of a war between two people. He was trying to track her down, trying to betray her to the Nazis, and she was trying to stay one step ahead of him, and barely was able to do that.
Is there a side of your creative imagination that sits back after putting all these podcasts together and you go, this would have made a great novel? And because I mean, this is the kind of stuff that draws people into war stories.
Yeah, I think a novel or a movie. I mean,
Yeah.
I tend to think cinematically, so I just think we've had tons of stories about male spies. I mean, we have James Bond leading the pack, but very few stories of real life female spies. And I think their time is coming because they really did essential things in the lead up to D-Day in France and served in other countries as well. So I think there was just a book on Josephine Baker who did great things as an entertainer and as a Allied spy in Paris. So I think it's the women's turn. It's finally coming full circle.
Mm. It involves prison breaking. I mean, that just blows me away that she was so actively involved with so many different levels of the war. But but for the prison breaks and stuff, oh my God.
Yeah, she had. There were 12 people in 1941 who were in a very tough prison called Mauzac, and they needed to get out. I mean, these were essential sort of people with very crucial information to the war. So she smuggled in sort of little saws and little devices that could help them get away, and she put them in sardine tins, sardine cans, and slowly built up this sort of cell within the prison. And finally, they escaped. In 1942, they went into the woods. The Nazis were chasing them, but she managed to get them to Lyon, and from there on to London. So, she was just brilliant at that aspect of her job, at organizing, but also she was on the ground. She was there when the weapons were dropped from airplanes. She did everything.
Mm. we talked a little bit about her depressions and stuff like that, and then to hear that she changed her name to Marie. I'm one of those people that because radio name versus real name, two completely different people. I wonder the same thing with Virginia Hall versus Marie. Did it change her personality?
One of the things that I've learned writing about spies is that they're able to, to have compartments inside themselves.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are sort of, amateur actors. They have this ability to do things in character that they wouldn't be able to do, as themselves. So I do think she had this ability to sort of separate her real self from this character that she was playing. She dressed very differently. She would change her hair because she had this limp, and that was a marker for the Nazis to chase her down. So she knew that she had to sort of be different just to survive. So she could have gone into the theater. She was very good at becoming someone else. And that's something she had all her life.
My dad always talked about how cold it was. I mean, he would look at me and say, you have no idea what cold is until you sit in a pit in Germany in the middle of a war. And so, I mean, for her to embrace that as well.
Right. Yeah, the physical aspect, I think we haven't talked about a lot, but she had a wooden leg and she had to be out there in the fields waiting for the airplanes to come. And she couldn't really betray any discomfort or pain to her men because they would lose respect for her. Mm-hmm. So, it was a lonely existence. I mean, physically, it was very tough. Mentally, she was alone. She didn't know who she could trust. She wasn't a native of France. She didn't have this network of friends and family that she could fall back on. She was all alone. So, that's one of the most impressive sort of aspects of her story.
And listeners need to understand, this is a time period where there was no internet, there is no satellite, there are no drones, there's nothing that like what we have today, that this was the cold, hard facts, and she was able to really be a strong figure in this.
Absolutely. She didn't have all those assets. Really, what she had was personal relationships. She was able to sort of bind people to her and become loyal to her. So, you didn't get your information from newspapers or whatever. You got it from a maid or a butler or, a delivery man. So she had to sort of get these people to trust her very quickly and evaluate that information in a way that today is sort of done for us over the internet.
Wow. I call your podcast Digging Up the Bones. And what I mean by that is that it's almost like you've reached out there and you're holding on to the bones of this historic story and it's speaking through you to reach us.
Well, thanks. I like that. I like that name. That's one of the great things about writing about history is that you're able to discover these individuals who really helped turn the course of history and then, fell out of favor or became obscure and sort of bring them back to life. So that is one of my favorite parts of writing these stories.
Wow. You've got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you, sir.
I would love that. Thanks for having me.
Will you be brilliant today, okay?
You too.